everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Disorganized Religion podcast, also known as the
Derp.
Well done. Today we are flying without Eric Johnson. I told the rest of the crew that what we can do is to just one by one try this without them and see how we do. Last week we had a Sans DeShawn edition, and that was a train wreck. So obviously, DeShawn is indispensable to our operation. We tried doing this without Ioanna for a while. Obviously, that didn't go as well as it needed to because we had to solve something, and she is the solution. So we're now going to see how we do without Eric. He may be expendable. And if so, it's a harsh role we live in, but we still got to learn.
No, Eric is essential to this operation.
Oh, you're a suck up because he's going to edit this later, and he's going to include good things about you and bad things about me. That's what's going to happen. Well, friends, I have some things to share that I know you will love. For one thing, you probably aren't aware of this, but I did order a chicken and an egg from Amazon, and I will let you know.
That's a good one.
So I thought that was pretty good, but what are you gonna do? I have one for you, Ioanna. I hear that people in Athens have a hard time getting up early in the morning. You know why?
Why?
Because dawn is tough on Greece.
Okay. Well, they do have a hard time getting up in the morning, but that's only because they stay up partying all night. So.
Better
And yelling Opa, I presume.
Yes.
They break a lot of stuff. Yeah. So I do want to say first that I'm in the Lost Souls today, my soccer team. This is our logo. The soles of the soccer shoe with the magnifying glass, because they are Lost Souls. And we're sponsored, of course, by your friends at Thunder Mifflin Paper Company. So,
People, persons, paper, people.
What's that?
Are we allowed to say that? I said the people, persons, paper, people. Are we allowed to say that?
You're allowed to. Whether you can or not is another question. So I have great news for everyone. My book is blowing up huge. For one thing, I got invited to come and speak at a missions conference, or a mission trip gathering of lots of youth kids and churches up in Arkansas. I'm going to get to speak at a church up there also. So, the Florida reception, been kind of lukewarm, but in Arkansas, crushing it. So, excited about that. But I also wanted to share that of the other two people on the podcast right now, one of them is reading the book. The other one is not, and we'll deal with that later. But for now, you want to tell us a little bit about how amazing my book is.
Oh, I would be so glad to share to you. So I am currently on, I'll tell you, I'm currently on page 18. And so but the reason why is because I've been reading it with my mom. If I was reading it by myself, I would have been done by now. But my mom really wants to read it with me. And so I've been reading to her. And so I wanted to point out a passage that started my kind of wondering into I was reading this and then you were making so much sense. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. And then I remembered that I knew you. And I was like, oh my God, this is so great. And so I'm going to, if you don't mind, no, wait, listen, it gets good. Okay. So I'm going to read a little passage that you wrote in your one act play chapter. I really liked how in the beginning you said, to each of you, the lights have been flicked on and off in the lobby. Please make your way to your seats in the theater and enjoy the production of Can I Offer You Some Organized Religion? I thought I felt so included when you read that.
Like
I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm a theater kid. I love the setting. And so you said, fortunately, when I was in seminary, I also learned about Jesus. I was struck by how little time he spent keeping people who were already in organized religion entertained. I was struck by how little time he spent thinking about how to keep things the way they were. I was struck by his imagination, and how he talked about what we could create here on earth if we became people who loved God and loved our neighbor. I was struck by how rarely he seemed to be concerned with getting people to heaven when they die, and how often he seemed concerned with getting people to experience heaven right here while we're still alive. In fact, when heaven comes up in the Bible, it's really a destination for people and things of God. It's where the people and things of God come from to make the world more like heaven. And when I read
that was good. Who wrote that?
It was
that really is. It's great.
It was so good. And I stopped, like I was in the middle of reading this, and I stopped, and I was like, and my mom was like, "Oh, so you like enjoyed that, didn't you?" I was like, "Yeah." And I'll tell you why. It was because, like, for me, religion had been such a hard topic to talk about, especially as I was growing up, because like now in a society where like we have so many things going on, like religion doesn't seem to be a topic that's talked about or discussed enough in like high schools and things like that. And if it is talked about, it's talked about very strongly and encouraged and almost seems forced. And so when me, like growing up, my parents always told me that I was Greek Orthodox, but I never like experienced like going to church and doing whatever until I came to Heritage. And so like and I've told you this before, I enjoyed how like gentle you were with like incorporating that sort of religion into everyday life. And that's always what I took the everyday life part of the sermons all the time, because I didn't want to think about religion or like what God meant, because like I didn't know. And then when I read this passage, I was like, oh, so like it doesn't have to be this like black and white thing, like because you always talk about how like there are gray areas in religion, and like how the Methodist Church is like that part, and you want it to be that part of like exploring that. And like this passage meant everything to me, because like you're right, like it doesn't have to be like this heaven and hell thing. It doesn't have to be like this black and white. And it's just like living and like loving our neighbors and loving ourselves and like loving everything around us here on earth as we're alive. And like, isn't that at the end of the day, like, isn't that what we're all trying to do, is like make better versions of ourselves and like make better versions of like, and like live our best lives and like do whatever. So why wouldn't we, encourage and like, bring God into that and like make him a part of it. And so I thought that was like so beautiful that like that like I connected with that and it like clicked. And it's so crazy that it came from like your book. And I just really appreciate that.
Thanks, Ioanna. I appreciate all that. So, I can tell you why people don't. Because actually doing what Jesus did is harder than the whole, well, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven when I die, so I'm covered, I'm good. Yet the thought of having to, continually do the work of being renewed ourselves and being a part of renewing the world, that's harder. It's harder. And so, you do have people who go looking to be comfortable in church. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be comforted when you're in your church. Like there should be reassurance and there should be community that makes you feel better when you're going through something difficult. But the churches that you can find online where the preacher's up there preaching and everyone's like cheering them on, like, yeah, you're telling everyone to be more like we already are. Love it. Yeah, let me be more of what I already am. That is easy to hear and draws a crowd. But if you think about it, churches in the first century weren't very big. And it could be that some people couldn't handle it and wanted something more comforting than Jesus. I will tell you that chapter of the book, the one act play, is probably the part that that people who would be, I'd say, theologically less Methodist and more, say, Baptist, Presbyterian, fundamentalist. They would have the hardest time with that chapter, because there is this sense of fear about going to heaven when you die, that churches have really made the core center of their message for the last 150 years. And so it's hard to, detach people from that, because it feels like, all right, I've gotten it all done. I'm all good. So when I say in that chapter that the burden of substitutionary atonement, right? The burden of having responsibility for whether people go to heaven when they die or not, I had to put that aside in order to do the ministry there well. And people will freak out about that and say, well, then how come you're not going to care about getting people to heaven when they die? And my response would be that I'm going to care about that as much as Jesus did. And I don't see him caring about that very often at all. So,
yeah, no, I just like, my input on this might be a little like tainted or whatever. Like I might be getting it wrong, but that's only just because like I'm just starting to learn about it. Like it's not something that it was always like a part of my life. And like, I don't know, I kind of want to sort through that and like see where religion fits in my everyday life and like what I should be doing and whatever. So like I'm just starting to learn about it. But I just like, I think this book was a really good start, and I'm very interested in it, and I find myself like highlighting passages and like writing little notes to myself, because like it's just something that like interests me. But I just because like you put it in a way where like it doesn't have to be like this like black and white thing. Like some people like force it upon others, and especially in like family situations and things like that. And so like the fact that I can like study this at like my own pace and like figure out what religion means to me it's just like really special. And so like I thank you for like starting that in my life. And then also I talked to my aunt about this too, and so now she listens to our podcast. So hi Thea. And
Thea.
So yeah, so she
we have three listeners now.
So I was talking to her about it. I was talking to her about it. Like I had told her like what I thought, and so she was like, "Oh my gosh, like I want to read this book too." And she actually lives in Seminole Heights, and so like the fact that like she didn't live there when this happened, but she just moved there, and so she was like, "Oh my gosh, like I want to read this book," and like whatever. So like I'm passing it around in my family, but I'll have them purchase some more so that we can do that, and then I can get them autographed by you as well. So.
Matt, you're still working on that royalty check, aren't you?
I know, right? I still haven't gotten one. It's funny how people have told me like, yeah, I love your book so much that I gave it to my friend and my neighbor, my cousin, and my uncle, and like my mother-in-law has like her copy of the book around like her whole apartment complex. I'm like, you're killing my bottom line here. But, what's funny is I feel like so often are reticent about exploring, beginning a faith journey of any kind, whether it be Christian or otherwise, because it's so easy to disagree with the caricatures of Christianity, right? Like I've heard atheists talking about why they're not a Christian, and they'll lead with like creation story. I mean, there's no way that really happened. I use this example with the confirmation kids this past week. My first confirmation swing is always about how to read the Bible and become a grown-up Christian. And so I'll say, look, there's light created on the first day, but the sun on the fourth day. So that is impossible. There's no way it happened this way. And so then I use that to go through, the book of Genesis was written down probably by Moses as they're walking to the promised land from Egypt. So his job is to extract these people from this place that had gods for everything, right? The river was a god, the Pharaoh was a god, the sun was a god, the moon was a god, the desert was a god, there was gods of the frog, gods of the cows, everything. And so as he gives them like their story that they're going to live off of forever in the promised land, they have to be taught that this is not a god. Yahweh, the one God, made this, and this isn't a god. Yahweh made that. This isn't a god. Yahweh made that. So if you're looking for reasons to disparage Christianity, you're going to be able to find them. But sometimes we get sort of spooked, I think, by not being able to answer questions like that. And so I feel like the version you'll find in the book and the version that I teach and other Methodists teach is not looking to have an argument with an atheist, not looking to make someone scared, therefore making them come to church. It should always be, you should always talk about Jesus because you can't help yourself, but have desire to talk about him because it's been so good to have him change your life and lead you in the right direction. So thanks. That's probably the best endorsement I've gotten for the book so far. So I'm gonna have to clip that out and put that on the Facebook page for the book because I have one. So DeShawn, now you've heard this glowing review of the book. When is your plan to start reading it?
As soon as possible, Matt.
All right. My mom is one of our listeners, and she's gonna get on your case too if you don't start reading it because she's like in charge of my PR. But thanks, Ioanna. I appreciate that. I'm glad to sign copies of it. Actually, I have several copies of it sitting in the doorway on the way into the sanctuary. If ever you have someone with you that needs one, so
keep that in mind.
So yeah, I make it available to everyone I possibly can. I'm not sure what my next book should be about. I'm still kind of mulling that over. You guys have any thoughts? What is the next book that needs to be written? You guys get back to me on that. Let me know what you think. I'm into consideration your thoughts there.
We should poll our listeners about that.
Ooh,
yeah.
Maybe our next poll. I'm currently working on the poll for the bracket challenge for which hymn is the one that's going to win favorite hymn of all time. But I do want to ask you guys a question. So it seems like, and anyone would probably tell you that on average, the attenders of churches tend to skew way older than both of you, also older than me. And so there's a lack of interest or lack of involvement by younger generations. And I've wondered if it's because churches don't really seem to express their need for young people to be there. I feel like there's this pressure to offer things that young people will like and will enjoy and will want to consume. We have this pressure to compete with other things that you're doing instead. But I'm not ashamed to say that the church needs younger people. We need to give it to you. We need to give the church to you and let you take it on sooner than later. So if I was to ask you guys, give this some thought. If you were to think about what you would have to offer a church that would make it better, what would you say? And second question, what are the things that you think younger people have to offer that the church really lacks you would bring to the table? So, DeShawn, since you haven't read my book yet, I'm making you go first.
That's fair. So the first question, Matt, is what can I offer to the church that the church doesn't have? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a different perspective. I'm gonna kind of pull on what Ioanna said last week, that but the church is moving in a different direction. Our world is moving in a different direction than what maybe um, our foreparents, lived and witnessed. And so I believe there's a different perspective that I have of the world and of the way things should be and how they ought to be, that I can offer the church. And I do. I've had a great platform at Mount Olive, and within the larger scope of the AME Church to voice my opinion, which is, I will say, is an exceptional case, because usually young people my age are not given a platform and leadership the way I have been, blessed to witness and experience it. But even then, I face backlash, and I face, he's too young to be making these types of decisions, or is he old enough to be in this conversation? And I think that kind of mentality is what my generation doesn't have. I think my generation has gotten really great at just honoring people's humanity and recognizing what a person can bring to the table. We talk about a lot of Methodism, that we offer our prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness. And you can do that at any age. You can offer, your self and devotion to God and to God's kingdom at any age. And so I think that's something that the church has lacked for a while, is recognizing gifts outside of their own. I think there's also I don't want to say a lack of regard, but there's a big push away and a great pushback by my generation, the generation following, for traditional systems, or for systems of like respectability politics and things of that nature. My generation is pushing back on that, not being treated any old way, not accepting certain things as fact and as reality. So I think that's something that this generation is offering. Just a new and a different way to do church, to be church. And I think that church often lacks the perspective and the wherewithal to kind of open its mind and open its arms to receive these younger leaders.
I feel like there is there is this like instinctive fear, I think, in churches. This fear of where the world is headed, and the fear of like letting go control of stuff, because we know that if we're in control of it, it'll go the way we like. Not, no. And it's easy to, to see the kids that, the older people, they were like Sunday school teachers for you, and they were chaperones on your, trip to the zoo or whatever you did. And now you're all grown up, and you're supposed to be able to, give your opinion and have wisdom about what we should do. Who are you, right? And it's one of those things that requires faith. You have to have faith that God has raised up a next generation of people to lead the church, and take a back seat and let the church take us where it wants to take us. So good call. How about you?
DeShawn really said it. Like, I mean, I can't, that was mine too. Like the perspective thing, just because like we're younger, and like there used to be like a certain way that people did things, and like now the world's changing, and then now there's a different way, and like it's just an eye opener for a lot of people. And so I think that like the perspective is important for churches and like our world now. And so I don't know, I just agree with what DeShawn said. I don't really have anything else to add.
So describe to me, so if you were to describe the mindset of previous generations, how would you describe it?
You trying to get us in trouble, Matt?
Yeah, I'm gonna say, yeah.
We're not live. We can edit it out.
I don't know if I should like say, I guess, I don't know. like I feel like the black and white thing. Like I feel like people like past generations have just been like, oh, there's God and everybody has to know about God. Like if you're a Christian, like everybody has to know and you have to know a certain way that he does things and like this is right and this is wrong in God's eyes and like you have to be perfect and like atone for your you have to like apologize for your sins and like you know um if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're not going to heaven and things like that. And so I feel like now it's just more of a open discussion as far as like what's right and wrong. Do we really know, like in the society that we live in now, like what what does that look like what does our everyday life look like now than it did before? So I don't know if that made any sense.
No, you're on it, Ioanna. And I think what it is a lack of grace.
Yes.
And I've seen it in the AME church, and I can't speak for a whole lot of other denominations, but I know in our branches of Methodism, John Wesley was huge on the tenets of grace, and yet there seems to be a lot of grace lacking in so many of in our congregations, because grace necessarily like presents a gray area. When you're living under law and ritual, when you're living under that black and white, almost like Mosaic law. We can go there. Mosaic law was black and white. You did these things, you didn't do these things. And if you read the book of Leviticus, you didn't mix linens, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. And it was the entire order of your life was laid out. And like there were things you did and didn't do, and if you violated those, then you were in violation of your relationship with God. That you were, in the sinner category. But when Jesus comes and introduces to us a new covenant of grace, it does away with that black and white system, and it opens up the door for there to be a gray area. And I think that so often we take this grace and then we try to put limits and parameters on where God's grace is available and who is allowed to experience God's grace. But the entire definition of grace is that it is God's undeserved and unmerited favor and goodness coming to us, coming to all of creation, to all people. And so, operating on that basis, there is no limit on who can experience God's grace, what God's grace is. So I think that like the lack of grace is a
So
huge
why so why do gray areas not scare you guys as much as these generations?
because I live in a gray area.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, like if you want to go into like, I mean, I don't know. I would give an example, but I don't know if it's gonna get me in trouble or not. Like,
Good.
okay, so sexuality, for example, like that's a gray area. That never used to be a thing back in the day. You weren't allowed to do that kind of. You weren't allowed. Like it wasn't like if you were, gay, like that, you were considered a disgrace or like a mistake or whatever. And like now people are like kids my age are being raised into like they have trauma from that because their parents are like, oh, I don't understand, oh, I don't, whatever. And so like that whole subject about the LGBTQ community and like what we can do with it and what like who we can and cannot love, like that's a gray area for a lot of people. And it's not necessarily a gray area for us, like for kids my age, because our parents may not have taught us this, but like we've grown up in like the society to know that like we should love everyone. And so, but our parents and like, the generations before, like some people don't understand that because it's new and it's a gray area and it's like, whatever. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that was just an example.
It's a great example. DeShawn, how come you're not gray areas?
What'd you say?
How come you're not afraid of gray areas?
How come I'm not afraid of gray areas? What Ioanna said is definitely is huge for me. I have a lot of close friends, family members who are lesbian or gay, bisexual, the entire length and scope of sexuality. And I really had to think about, the God that I serve and, how I relate to these people. because I was raised in a fundamentalist, like mindset, where we don't say gay, where we don't, where that's not allowed. But I had to really reevaluate. I mean, as I've gotten older, I reevaluated who God is, and who God is to me. And so the way I define God and how I believe God interacts with us, I think that's just different from me now. And so I'm not afraid of gray areas because I believe, God operates in gray areas. And I think God, is there with, and I think the person of Jesus, when we think about who Jesus was, how Jesus went and sought out people who lived in what would have been societal gray areas and the margins and those who were left out and looked over. That was Jesus's primary ministry, was to the lost or to those whom society had discounted and counted out. So if Jesus could work in the gray areas, if Jesus could minister in the gray areas, why can't we? And moreover, isn't that what God is calling us to?
So, friends, thanks so much for joining us for the Disorganized Religion podcast. You heard some great advice on how to not be afraid of gray areas today. So, thanks so much to DeShawn and Ioanna. Thanks so much for Eric for not being here and letting us experiment on him being absent. And we'll see you guys next time.
See ya.